My name is Eleanor Vance, and for 68 years I've believed in the fundamental goodness of people. I believed that love was a fortress, and that family was the stone from which it was built. I was wrong. The story I'm about to tell you isn't easy to share. It's a story of deep betrayal, of the kind of deception you only read about in novels. No one knew I was at the bank that day. But there he was, my daughter's husband, telling a stranger I was losing my mind, handing over forged papers to prove I was mentally incompetent. But he forgot one thing. I was standing right behind him. Before we get into the details of that awful day, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. It's a little after 2 p.m. here on a sunny Wednesday in Asheville, North Carolina. Drop your city or country and the time in the comments below. It makes me feel a little less alone knowing we're all here together. Okay, let's get back to it. It all started with a fall. Not a dramatic, life-altering tumble, but a simple trip over a loose garden stone near my prize-winning hydrangeas. I scraped my knee and bruised my pride, but that was all. To my daughter, Sarah, and her husband, David, however, it was a sign, a harbinger of my supposed decline. They had moved in with me 2 years prior after David's tech startup went under. He'd lost everything, he said. It was supposed to be temporary, a way for them to get back on their feet. I was happy to help. This big house filled with memories of my late husband, Charles, felt too quiet anyway. After the fall, they insisted on hiring a home care aide. "Just for a few hours a day, Mom," Sarah had said, her voice dripping with concern. "Just to help with meals and make sure you're taking your pills." I resisted, but they were relentless, and soon a woman named Brenda started showing up every morning. Brenda was in her late 40s, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was efficient, I'll give her that, but she was also watchful. Too watchful. She carried a little notebook, and I'd catch her jotting things down when she thought I wasn't looking. If I misplaced my reading glasses, she'd note it. If I asked her to repeat a story she had told me, she'd note it. The gaslighting was subtle at first. It was a slow, creeping poison. "You sure, Mom?" David would say with a little chuckle. "You just told me that story 5 minutes ago." Or Sarah would gently touch my arm. "We talked about this yesterday, remember?" They'd exchange these quick, knowing glances over my head as if I were a puzzle they were trying to solve, a piece of furniture that was starting to show its age. I started to doubt myself. Was my memory really that bad? I found myself becoming more withdrawn, quieter, afraid to say the wrong thing, afraid to give them more ammunition for their little notebooks and their concerned whispers. I was becoming a ghost in my own home, fading into the floral wallpaper I'd picked out with Charles decades ago. I tried to push the feelings down, telling myself I was just being sensitive, that I was lucky to have family who cared so much. But on a quiet Tuesday morning, I woke up with a feeling I couldn't ignore. It was a strange, insistent nudge in the back of my mind, a clear, silent command that said, "Go to the bank." I didn't know why. I had no business there. But I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that I had to go. That single, inexplicable urge would end up saving my life. I just didn't know it yet. The morning air in Asheville had that crisp, early autumn bite to it. I pulled on an old gray cardigan, the one with the soft, worn elbows, and didn't even bother with the touch of lipstick. This wasn't a planned outing. It was an errand of instinct. As I drove my old, reliable Buick down the familiar route to Oak Street, I felt a wave of foolishness wash over me. What was I even doing? The bank tellers all knew me. I could do most of my transactions online or over the phone. This sudden, urgent need to go in person felt nonsensical, like a dream you can't shake after you wake up. The branch of Carolina Trust Bank was a place of deep familiarity. Charles and I had opened our first joint account there the week after we were married. It was where we'd secured the loan for this very house, where we'd open a savings account for Sarah the day she was born. The building itself felt like a part of my history, its sturdy brick facade a symbol of stability and trust. But as I pulled into the parking lot, an eerie quiet hung in the air. It was unusually empty for a weekday morning. I remember thinking that was odd. I parked the car, the silence of the engine's death amplifying the strange stillness. I walked toward the glass entrance, my sensible flats making no sound on the pavement. My hands were steady, my breath was normal. Nothing in me was prepared for what I was about to witness. Not a single part of me. I pushed open the heavy glass door and the familiar scent of clean carpets and crisp money filled the air. The lobby was nearly deserted, save for a young woman at a teller window and two figures standing at the far end of the room near the manager's office. My eyes focused, my breath caught in my throat. It was David, my son-in-law. He was talking to Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, a kind man with silver hair who had helped me sort out Charles's estate when he passed. David was wearing that pale gray suit, the one he only wore when he wanted to seem professional, trustworthy. It was the same suit he'd worn when he gave that long, trembling speech asking for Sarah's hand of marriage. I'd known then that something in him felt rehearsed. And now seeing him there, talking so earnestly with my bank manager, that same feeling of unease prickled my skin. It felt like a violation. My heart began to beat a little faster, a low thrum of warning against my ribs. I leaned forward just slightly, my ears straining to catch their low conversation over the hum of the air conditioning. And that's when I heard it. A phrase that would shatter the foundation of my world. A phrase that proved my strange morning premonition wasn't foolish at all. It was a lifeline. I just didn't know it yet. Her progressive decline has been rapid, Mr. Henderson, David said, his voice a perfect blend of sorrow and responsibility. I had to press my hand against the rough bark of the planter to keep from making a sound. He was talking about me. The polite, concerned tone he used was the same one he'd used when he'd talk about the weather, casual and confident. It's the dementia. She's at a point now where she doesn't recognize people consistently, not even Sarah some days. It's been heartbreaking to watch.
My mind reeled. Not recognize Sarah? I had just had coffee with her that morning. I remembered the exact shade of blue of her sweater, the way she'd complained about a new wrinkle she'd found by her eye. I remembered everything. Mr. Henderson looked grave. He adjusted his glasses. I'm so very sorry to hear that, David. Eleanor has been a client here for over 40 years. A wonderful woman. The best, David agreed, shaking his head sadly. He slid a thick folder across the polished wood of the counter. And that's why we're here. We need to formalize things. For her own protection, of course. Her doctors and her in-home caregiver both agree she's no longer of sound mind to manage her own finances. This paperwork is just to establish a medical guardianship, allowing Sarah and me to handle her accounts, pay her bills, make sure nothing gets misused. I felt the blood drain from my face. Guardianship. The word was a cage. He was talking about taking everything. My savings, my pension, the home Charles and I had built, my entire life reduced to a set of accounts he wanted to control. He was erasing me, right there, under the fluorescent lights of the bank I trusted. The air in my lungs turned to ice. I couldn't breathe. I felt a dizzying sense of unreality, as if I were watching a scene from a movie, a particularly cruel one. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe there was another Eleanor Vance, another elderly woman in Asheville with a daughter named Sarah and a son-in-law named David. But no, the ficus leaves trembled from the shaking of my own hand. He was talking about me. I touched my own wrist, felt the steady thrum of my pulse. I wasn't gone, I wasn't confused, and I sure as hell wasn't under any guardianship. That's when I saw it, the final, damning piece of evidence. The top page of the folder he'd pushed toward Mr. Henderson was a letter, and on that letter, I could just make out the forged, shaky signature at the bottom. It was supposed to be mine. They hadn't just lied. They had committed fraud. They had manufactured a reality in which I was incompetent, helpless, and silent. They had tried to bury me alive. But they made one critical mistake. They had tried to bury me while I was still standing, watching their every move. The shock began to recede, replaced by something else. A cold, hard anger. An anger so pure and clear it felt like a diamond forming under pressure in the center of my chest. I knew what I had to do. I want to pause here for a moment and ask you all, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have confronted him right then and there? Or would you have walked away to plan your next move? Let me know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. Okay, back to the story. I peeled my hand away from the planter. I pushed myself upright, my spine straightening into a rod of pure steel. The dizziness was gone. The fear was gone. All that remained was a chilling clarity. I took one step, then another. My sensible flats, so quiet before, now seemed to clap against the polished marble floor with the deliberate report of a judge's gavel. Step, step, step. Each one was a declaration. I am here. I am aware. I am not finished. David's back was still to me. He was pointing at a line in the paperwork, explaining something to Mr. Henderson. He didn't hear me coming until it was too late. Mr. Henderson's eyes lifted from the folder. They widened slightly. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. David, sensing the shift in the manager's attention, turned. His face. I will never forget the look on his face. It wasn't just surprise. It was the face of a man who has just seen a ghost. The blood drained away, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly white. The polite, professional mask shattered, replaced by raw, naked panic. His jaw went slack. I stopped directly beside him at the counter. I didn't look at him. Not yet. I smiled warmly at the branch manager. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice as calm and pleasant as the autumn day outside. "Eleanor? Mrs. Vance?" he stammered, blinking rapidly as if his brain couldn't process the two realities, the woman on the paper who couldn't recognize her family, and the woman standing before him, clear-eyed and composed. Then I turned my head slowly and looked at my son-in-law. "Good morning, David." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "Eleanor, Mom, what are you doing here?" "I bank here. I have for over 40 years. A better question might be, what are you doing here with my accounts and with documents I have never seen or signed in my life?" I tapped a single, manicured finger on the top page of the folder, on my forged signature. "This isn't... I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can," I said, my voice dropping a little lower, a little colder. "I'm sure you have a very well-rehearsed explanation, but let's not waste everyone's time." I turned my full attention back to the bank manager, who was watching this unfold with a look of dawning horror. "Mr. Henderson, my name is Eleanor Vance. This is my account. I am not under medical guardianship. I have not authorized anyone to act on my behalf, and I most certainly recognize every single member of my family, especially my son-in-law, who at this moment looks as if he's trying to swallow his own tongue." The silence in the bank was absolute. Then, Mr. Henderson, without a word, reached out, quietly retrieved the folder from the counter, and held it out to me. "I believe this belongs to you, Mrs. Vance." I took it. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. "Thank you," I said. I tucked the folder under my arm, turned my back on David, and walked away. I didn't run. I walked, with my head held high, out the glass doors and into the bright, unforgiving sunlight. The game was over. Or at least, I thought it was. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the traffic or the turns I made. I was operating on pure autopilot, my mind a swirling vortex of disbelief and white-hot rage. I didn't go straight home. I couldn't. The thought of walking into the house that they had contaminated with their lies was too much to bear. I pulled into the parking lot of a small city park a few blocks away, killed the engine, and just sat there, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The folder sat on the passenger seat beside me. A loaded gun. A ticking bomb. For a long time, I just stared at it. To open it was to make it real. To read the words was to accept the depth of their betrayal. But I had to know. With trembling hands, I untucked it from under my arm and opened it. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. The first section was filled with weekly caregiver reports from Brenda, the aide. They were filled with meticulous, soul-crushing lies. Eleanor spent 20 minutes staring blankly at the wall today. Possible disassociation. I hadn't been staring blankly. I had been thinking about a passage in a book I was reading. Became agitated and confused when asked about her finances.
I hadn't been agitated. I had been annoyed that she was asking about my finances in the first place. Repeated the same story about her late husband 3 times in 1 hour. Significant short-term memory loss noted. I was sharing fun memories, not exhibiting symptoms. She had twisted every normal human moment of my life into a clinical sign of decay. She was their paid informant, their star witness in the trial against my own mind. The next section contained a printout from an online cognitive assessment test. I remember the day David had asked me to do it. "It's just a fun brain game, Mom," he'd said, smiling. "Keeps you sharp." I'd answered the silly questions, matched the patterns, and thought nothing of it. Now, I saw the results. He had circled certain answers in red with notes in the margins like delayed response time and difficulty with abstract reasoning. He had manufactured evidence from a game. But the final section was the most chilling. It was the legal paperwork, a formal petition for guardianship. It claimed I was mentally incapacitated and a danger to my own financial well-being. It named David and Sarah as my proposed legal guardians, giving them complete and total control over every aspect of my life. And there, at the bottom of the petition, were their signatures. My daughter's beautiful, familiar signature right next to his. And then I saw the last page, a notarized statement. It was a sworn affidavit, supposedly from me, willingly agreeing to the guardianship. My signature was forged, a clumsy, shaky imitation of my handwriting. And the notary stamp? I recognized the name. A man named Peterson, a so-called friend of David's who had come over for a barbecue a few months ago. I remember David calling him away for a private business chat. They hadn't been talking business. They had been plotting my demise. This wasn't a spontaneous act of greed. This was a cold, calculated conspiracy that had been in motion for months, happening right under my roof. They hadn't just lied to a bank manager. They had committed a federal crime. I closed the folder, the slick plastic feeling toxic beneath my fingertips. The rage was gone, replaced by a profound, icy sorrow. My daughter, my Sarah. How could she? The question echoed in the silent car, unanswered. I started the engine and drove home. The house no longer looked like a sanctuary. It looked like a crime scene. I walked into the kitchen and placed the folder on the polished granite island. It sat there, an obscene object in the heart of my home. I stood for a moment, just looking at it, my reflection a distorted stranger in its shiny surface. Every corner of this room held a memory of Sarah. Her first steps, right by the pantry door. The hundreds of drawings I'd taped to the refrigerator. The late-night talks we'd had at this very island, sharing secrets and dreams over cups of tea. How had that girl, my girl, become the woman who signed that piece of paper? I didn't have to wait long for an answer. I heard her car in the driveway, the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. A few moments later, the back door opened and she walked in, humming a cheerful tune, juggling a bag of groceries. "Hey, Mom," she said brightly. "Traffic was a nightmare. I got those organic peaches you like. Did you have a good—" She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes, which had been bright and untroubled, landed on the folder. The change was instantaneous. The cheerful mask fell away, and for a split second I saw raw, unfiltered fear. It wasn't guilt that appeared first. It was the terror of being caught. Her face paled. The grocery bag slipped from her grasp and a torrent of apples rolled across the hardwood floor. A noisy, chaotic disruption to the sudden, heavy silence. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Where did you get that?" I didn't answer. I just stood there. My silence was a more powerful accusation than any words could be. She took a hesitant step forward, her eyes fixed on the folder as if it were a venomous snake. "Mom, listen," she started, her voice shaking. "I can explain. It's not what it looks like." "Isn't it?" I finally said, my voice low and devoid of all warmth. "No, I mean, yes, but David and I were just worried after you fell. We just wanted to be prepared, to have something in place just in case something ever happened. It was only to protect you." The word protect hung in the air, a grotesque lie. "Protect me," I said, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to control it, "by declaring me mentally unfit behind my back, by forging my signature, by telling strangers I don't even recognize my own daughter?" Tears began to well in her eyes. They were tears of self-pity, not remorse. "We were never going to use it unless we had to," she pleaded. "Unless you had to," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "According to these papers, Sarah, that time has already come. These papers say I'm already gone. They say I don't remember you." I took a step closer to her, my gaze unwavering. "You didn't tell me I'd become such an inconvenience." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She just stood there, a guilty child caught in a lie too big to escape. And then she said it. The 6 words that broke what was left of my heart. The 6 words that proved there was no misunderstanding, no misguided concern, only a cold, selfish calculation. She looked down at the floor, at the scattered apples, and murmured, I didn't think you'd notice. I didn't think you'd notice." The words echoed in the cavernous silence of the kitchen. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was a confession of the highest order. It was an admission that she saw me as someone who was already so diminished, so out of touch, that my own erasure could be conducted without my awareness. The pain of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Before I could respond, before I could even process the sheer stunning cruelty of that statement, my phone began to ring, its cheerful chirping tone a jarring intrusion. I glanced at the screen. It was Martha, my best friend of 40 years. We played bridge together every Thursday and talked on the phone almost every day. Wiping the sudden, hot tears from my eyes with the back of my hand, I answered, turning my back on Sarah. "Hello, Martha." "Eleanor?" "Oh, good," I answered, she said. Her voice sounded strange, hesitant. "Honey, are you feeling all right?" The question caught me off guard. "I'm fine, Martha. Why do you ask?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Well," she began, her words chosen carefully, "it's just, I ran into your Sarah at the grocery store about an hour ago. We had a little chat." I felt a cold dread begin to creep up my spine. "Oh."
Yes, and, well, she just seemed so worried about you, dear, Martha continued, her voice laced with a sympathy that now felt like a weapon. "She mentioned that your memory has been slipping quite a bit lately, that you've been getting a little paranoid, accusing people of things. She said you had a bit of an episode this morning. She was just so distraught." I closed my eyes. It wasn't enough to try and steal my money. It wasn't enough to try and declare me legally insane. They were actively, systematically poisoning my world against me. They were turning my friends into their unwitting spies, their shoulders of sympathy. They were building a narrative, brick by brick, lie by lie, to prove that I was exactly who they claimed I was, a confused, paranoid old woman who couldn't be trusted. They were trying to gaslight an entire town on my behalf. If my friends believed I was unwell, who would I turn to? Who would believe me when I told them the truth? It was a spider's web, and I was seeing now just how meticulously they had woven it, with me caught directly in the center. "Eleanor, are you still there?" Martha's voice broke through my shock. "I'm here, Martha," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "And what Sarah told you, it's not true." "Oh, of course, dear," she said, but her tone was placating. The kind of voice you use with a child or someone you believe to be unwell. "You just take care of yourself, okay? We're all thinking of you." She hung up. I lowered the phone, my hand shaking. I turned to face my daughter. Sarah's face was as white as a sheet. She had heard the entire conversation.
She knew she was caught in yet another lie. Just then, the front door swung open and David walked in, whistling a jaunty tune. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the scene before him. Me holding the phone, Sarah looking horrified, and the damning folder was still sitting on the kitchen island. "Well," he muttered, dropping his keys on the counter with a clatter, "I guess the cat's out of the bag." "The cat was not let out of the bag, David," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "She was thrown out, and she clawed her way back in." He had the audacity to roll his eyes. "Look, Eleanor, you're making a big deal out of nothing. This is a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I took a step toward him. He instinctively took a step back. "Let's be clear about what I understand. I understand that you stood in my bank and told a man I've known for years that I was mentally unfit. I understand that you forged my signature on legal documents. I understand that you coached my own daughter to lie to my face. And," I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in, "I now understand that you have both been spreading malicious rumors about my mental state to my oldest friends. Does that sound like a misunderstanding to you?" Sarah let out a small sob, but David's face hardened. The faux concern was gone, replaced by a sullen, defiant anger. "We did it because we had to. We had documentation, medical input from Brenda. We didn't do this on a whim." "Brenda?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that didn't sound like me at all. "The woman you paid to spy on me and twist my every word? You mean the notes from that memory screening you tricked me into taking? The one the website itself said was for entertainment purposes only? That's your documentation?" He said nothing. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might crack. "You both made a decision to erase me," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. "Not because I was ill, but because I was inconvenient, because I wouldn't just sign over control of my own life, because I still asked questions, because I was still here, living and thinking in a house you had already decided was yours." That hit a nerve. "You have no idea how exhausting it's been." He finally exploded, his voice rising. "Managing everything, helping you, running this house, dealing with your moods." "Oh, I see," I interrupted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "So I raised a daughter for 35 years. I paid for her education. I paid for her wedding. I gave you the down payment on your first house, the one you lost. I welcomed you into my home when you had nowhere else to go. I have paid the mortgage, the utilities, the taxes on this house you live in for free. But now that I require a voice of my own, I'm suddenly a burden?" He bit his tongue, his face flushing with anger. Sarah finally found her voice. "Mom, please." "No," I said, turning to her. My heart ached, but I couldn't stop. The truth had to be spoken. "You sat at my kitchen table for months, drinking my coffee, knowing what was happening. You knew they were preparing these documents. You knew David was going to the bank today. You knew he was lying." She nodded finally, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I didn't want to believe it," she murmured. "I thought if we never actually used the paperwork, it wouldn't matter." "But you signed it," I stated flatly. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "And you know what else I know, David? I know about your expensive hobbies, the late-night phone calls, the secretive trips to the ATM. You didn't just lose your job. You're losing money you don't have, aren't you? This wasn't about protecting me. This was about finding a way to fund your addiction with my life savings." The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah stared at her husband, her eyes wide with a new kind of horror. He looked at me, not with anger now, but with the cold, hard stare of a cornered animal. The final mask had been ripped away. I wasn't dealing with a misguided son-in-law. I was dealing with a desperate, dangerous man. and he had just realized that I knew everything. The next morning, I walked into the downtown offices of Arthur Pembleton, attorney at law. Arthur had been my lawyer for 30 years. He was a portly man with a sharp mind and a no-nonsense attitude who had helped me and Charles draft our first wills over cheap coffee and big dreams. He had helped me navigate the labyrinth of probate court after Charles passed. I trusted him implicitly. He greeted me with a warm smile, but it faded as soon as he saw my face. "Eleanor," he said, ushering me into his leather-bound office. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Sit. Tell me everything." And so I did. I laid the folder on his expansive mahogany desk. I told him about the nudge, the bank, and Mr. Henderson. I recounted the conversation with David, the lies about my memory. I described the forged signature, Brenda's poisonous reports, the notarization by David's crony. I told him about the phone call from Martha, about the web of rumors they were weaving. I told him everything, my voice steady and clear, fueled by a night of sleepless, righteous anger. Arthur listened in complete silence, his fingers steepled under his chin. He read through every single page in the folder, his expression growing darker with each turn. When he was finished, he closed the folder gently, pushed it to the side, and looked at me, his eyes blazing.
"Eleanor," he said, his voice a low growl. "This is not just immoral. This is a felony. Several, in fact. Conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, attempted exploitation of the elderly. What they have done, we could ruin them. We could have them disbarred if they have professional licenses. We could see them in jail." I had considered that. The thought of David behind bars brought a grim satisfaction. But Sarah, the thought of my own daughter, as weak and complicit as she was, in a prison jumpsuit, my heart couldn't bear it. "I don't want to send Sarah to jail, Arthur," I said quietly. "But I will not let them win. I will not let them do this to me. I want to take back my life. I want to protect myself so thoroughly that they can never, ever touch me or my assets again." Arthur nodded, a look of fierce determination on his face. "Good," he said, pulling a yellow legal pad toward him. "That is a goal I can work with. And we will be aggressive. We will be methodical, and we will leave them with absolutely nothing to stand on." He picked up a pen. "So, where do we begin?" "We begin," I said, feeling the first true spark of hope ignite within me, "by cutting them off. Completely. We turn off the money tap. Right now." He smiled, a grim, predatory smile. "I like the way you think, Eleanor. Let's make some phone calls." He reached for his phone, and in that moment, in the quiet, wood-paneled safety of his office, I felt the power shifting. I was no longer the victim in their sordid little play. I was the director, and I was about to rewrite the entire script. The fight for my life had officially begun. The next hour was a whirlwind of decisive action. From the speakerphone on Arthur's desk, I became the commander of my own liberation. The first call was to my bank. With Arthur providing the legal jargon, I revoked all permissions, froze the joint savings account David had access to, and instructed them to deny any and all inquiries about my finances from David or Sarah Vance. I arranged for a new primary checking account to be opened accessible only by me, and scheduled a transfer of all my funds. The woman on the phone was professional, but I could hear the undertone of shock in her voice. The second call was to the credit card company. "I wish to report fraudulent activity," I stated clearly. I explained that my son-in-law had been using a supplementary card for unauthorized purchases. The card was canceled immediately. The flow of easy money was officially severed. The third call was the most satisfying. It was to the home care agency that employed Brenda. I was put through to a supervisor. "I am terminating the services of Brenda Albright effective immediately. Furthermore, I am lodging a formal complaint.
Your employee has been found to be falsifying medical reports and colluding with members of my family in an attempt to fraudulently gain control of my assets." There was a stunned silence, followed by frantic sputtering. "Ma'am, I assure you, we take these allegations very seriously. You should, because my lawyer, who is sitting right here, is taking them very seriously as well. Expect a formal letter from his office." I hung up before she could respond. The thought of Brenda having to explain her actions to her superiors brought a grim smile to my face. After we finished the calls, Arthur turned to me. "Step 1 is complete. They are financially isolated. Step 2 is securing your home." He had already called a 24-hour locksmith. "They will be there within an hour to change every lock on your property, including the garage and the garden shed." I felt a wave of relief so profound, it almost made me dizzy. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I was building a wall, brick by brick, call by call, a wall they could not breach. Folks, thank you so much for sticking with me on this journey. It means the world. If you're still here, do me a favor and just type the number 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. Your support is what gives me strength. Now, let's finish this. I drove home feeling like a general returning from a successful campaign. The locksmith, a burly, kind-eyed man, was already there, his truck parked in my driveway. As he worked, I walked through my house. My house. I fired off a short, clear text to both Sarah and David from my phone. "The locks on the house have been changed. A key has been left for you under the mat. It will only work for the next 30 days. I didn't have to wait long for a response. My phone buzzed with a text from David. It was just 2 words. "You'll regret this." I looked at his message, then looked around at the sunlit rooms of my home, the familiar paintings on the wall, the photos of a smiling Charles on the mantelpiece. I typed back a single-word reply. Never. A few days later, I was back in Arthur's office. The initial storm had passed. The locks were changed, the accounts secured. Now it was time to fortify the future. "I want a new will, Arthur," I said, my voice firm. "An ironclad, airtight will that leaves no room for interpretation or challenge." He slid a fresh legal pad in front of him. "I thought you might. Let's talk beneficiaries." "Everything," I said without hesitation, "goes to my granddaughter, Lily." Lily was 12, a bright, funny girl who had her grandfather's kind eyes. She was the one pure, untainted thing in this whole mess. She was an innocent. But I don't want her to have access to it all at once. She's too young, and I don't trust her parents to guide her. "A trust," he said, already scribbling notes. "We'll set up a testamentary trust. The assets will be managed by a trustee of your choosing until she reaches a certain age or for specific purposes like education, housing, and healthcare." "You," I said, simply. "I want you to be the trustee. I don't trust anyone else." Arthur looked up from his notes, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He nodded slowly. "I would be honored, Eleanor. It's a significant responsibility, but I will carry it out to the letter." We spent the next hour mapping out the details of the Lily Vance Trust. It would pay for her college education, a down payment on a first home, a wedding if she chose to have one. It would provide a safety net for her, a legacy from the grandmother who loved her. It was a comfort to know that no matter what happened, Lily would be taken care of. She would be safe. Then came the hard part. "And Sarah and David?" Arthur asked, gently, his pen hovering over a page. I took a deep breath. This was the final cut, the severing of the cord. I said, "They are to be explicitly disinherited. They are to receive nothing, not a single penny, not a photograph, not a piece of furniture from this house." I paused, then added, "And I want you to state the reason directly in the will. I want it on public record." Arthur looked at me, his eyebrows raised. "That's an unusual step, Eleanor. it can sometimes invite a legal challenge.
Let them challenge it, I replied, my voice hard as stone. I want it written that they are disinherited due to their conspiracy to commit fraud, their attempts to have me declared mentally incompetent for financial gain, and the profound emotional distress and betrayal they inflicted upon me. I want the truth to be the last word. Arthur held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. So be it. He began to write, his pen scratching across the page, each stroke a nail in the coffin of the relationship I once had with my daughter. As I sat there, watching him legally dismantle the life I had built for my family, I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange, cold peace. I was no longer just protecting myself. I was creating a record, a testament of truth that would outlive me. It would be a permanent stain on their names, a consequence they could never outrun. It was a harsh justice, but it was the only justice I had left. The will was no longer just a document about money. It was my final statement, my testimony from beyond the grave. The atmosphere in the house for the next few weeks was thick, with a toxic, unspoken tension. David and Sarah moved through the rooms like hostile ghosts. They knew their financial lifelines were cut, but they hadn't yet grasped the full scope of their new reality. They seemed to be operating under the assumption that this was a temporary storm, that my anger would eventually cool, and that things would return to some semblance of normalcy. They were wrong. The final confrontation happened on a rainy Tuesday evening, exactly 3 weeks after my visit to the bank. I had asked Arthur to draw up one last document. I waited for them in the living room, sitting in the armchair Charles had always favored. The document lay on the coffee table in a crisp manila envelope. They came in together, dripping water on the entryway rug, their faces sullen. They had clearly been arguing. "What is it now, Eleanor?" David asked, his voice weary and belligerent. "Another lecture? Another rule?" I didn't answer. I simply pointed to the envelope on the table. Sarah approached it cautiously, as if it might bite her. She picked it up, her hands trembling slightly, and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. She read it, her eyes widening in disbelief. She passed it to David, who snatched it from her hand. His face went from pale to a deep, mottled red as he scanned the page. "What is this?" he snarled, though he knew perfectly well what it was. "A joke?" "It is a formal legal notice of eviction. As per the terms of your tenancy at will, you have 30 days from the date of this notice to vacate my property. That gives you 1 week." Sarah gasped. "Mom, you're kicking us out? You're kicking out your own daughter?" "No," I replied, looking her straight in the eye. "You removed yourselves the moment you stood in a bank and declared me mentally gone. You gave up your place in this home when you signed your name on a forged document. I am simply making it official." "You can't do this," David shouted, crumpling the notice in his fist. "We have nowhere to go. You know about my financial situation." "Your financial situation is the entire reason we are here, is it not? It is the reason you concocted this monstrous plan. You thought you could solve your gambling debts by stealing my life savings. Your poor planning is not my emergency. It is yours, and yours alone." Sarah burst into tears, the loud, heving sobs of a child who has finally been told no. "What about Lily? Where is she supposed to sleep?" This was the question I had dreaded, the one they would use as a human shield. I had prepared for it. I reached down beside my chair and picked up a second, smaller folder. I held it out to her. "This," I said, "is a copy of the trust I established in Lily's name. It is modest, but real, and it is separate from you. She is 12 years old, and she is not responsible for your decisions. But I guarantee you, she will learn from them, for better or for worse." David's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" "No," I replied, standing up to face him, feeling taller than I had in years. "It makes me a woman who stopped apologizing for having boundaries. You will be out of my house in 7 days." I turned my back on them and walked toward the kitchen, leaving them standing in the living room with the ruins of the life they had tried to steal. The verdict had been delivered. The sentence was eviction. The final week was an exercise in quiet misery.
The house was filled with the funereal sounds of packing, the screech of packing tape, the hollow thud of boxes being filled, the strained, whispered arguments that would stop abruptly whenever I entered a room. I stayed out of their way, confining myself mostly to my bedroom and the garden. I was a stranger in my own home, counting down the days until it was mine again. The day of the move was gray and overcast, the sky mirroring the mood. A large, battered moving truck was parked in my driveway, a stark symbol of their defeat. I watched from the kitchen window as 2 hired men, along with David, hauled boxes and furniture out of the house. Sarah directed the traffic, her face pale and drawn. When the truck was almost full, Lily came to find me in the garden. Her young face was streaked with tears. She threw her arms around my waist and held on tight. "I don't want to go, Grandma," she sobbed into my shirt. "I know, my sweet girl, I know. But this isn't goodbye. This is just a change. You can call me anytime, and you can come visit whenever you want. This will always be a safe place for you. I promise." She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed. "It's not your fault, Grandma. I heard them fighting. I know what they did." The maturity in her voice both saddened and proudened me. I hugged her again. "You are a smart, good girl, Lily. Don't you ever forget that." She finally pulled away and ran back to the car where her parents were waiting. David didn't look at me once. He slammed the car door shut and stared straight ahead. But Sarah lingered. She walked slowly up the porch steps, clutching her purse like a shield. She stopped a few feet from me. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Mom," she said, her voice raspy from crying. "I know what I did was unforgivable." I said nothing. I just waited. "But I'm going to earn back your trust," she continued, her gaze fixed on the porch floor. "I swear it, even if it takes the rest of my life. I'm going to get help. David is going to get help. And I will work every day to be the daughter you deserve." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. I saw the daughter I had raised, buried under layers of fear and weakness and poor choices. I saw a flicker of the woman she could still become. I tilted my head slightly. "Then I will leave the porch light on."
A small, watery smile touched her lips. It was faint, tired, but it was real. She nodded once, then turned and walked to the car. I stood on the porch and watched them drive away, the big truck following behind them like a hearse. I watched until they turned the corner at the end of the street and were gone. The silence they left behind wasn't empty. It was clean. It was peace. That evening, for the first time in over 2 years, I walked through every room of my house, and it was truly mine. I opened the windows, letting the cool night air chase away the stale energy of resentment and deceit. The silence wasn't a weapon anymore. It wasn't the heavy, loaded quiet of things unsaid. It was a comfortable blanket. It was serenity. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, carried it into the living room, and sat down in my armchair, the one Charles had always called my throne. For so long, it had felt like my little corner of a house that was no longer mine. Tonight, it felt like the heart of my kingdom, reclaimed. The house breathed around me, a gentle, familiar sigh. It was finally home again. My gaze fell upon my journal sitting on the end table. I picked it up along with a pen. I thought about Lily, about the lesson this whole ordeal had taught me, a lesson I had paid for so dearly. I wanted her to know it, to carry it with her, so that she would never have to learn it the hard way, as I had. On a fresh page, I wrote, "To my dearest Lily, if I can leave you with one piece of wisdom, let it be this: trust your instincts. That little voice inside you, the one that whispers when something feels wrong, is the truest guide you will ever have. Do not let anyone, no matter how much you love them, convince you that you are crazy for hearing it. Never allow someone to dim your light so that they can shine brighter. Your boundaries are not a suggestion. They are a sacred wall to protect the garden of your soul. Do not ever apologize for building that wall high and strong. And above all, remember this: do not let anyone speak for you who would not fight for you. The people who truly love you
will amplify your voice, not silence it. I closed the journal, feeling a sense of closure. The battle was over. I had scars, there was no doubt about that. The wound where my trust in my daughter used to be would likely never fully heal, but I had survived. I was not erased. My light, which they had tried so hard to extinguish, was burning brighter than ever. My story has an ending, but I know that for so many people out there, a story like this is their current reality. It's the quiet fear, the subtle manipulation, the heartbreak of being betrayed by those who are supposed to protect you. If my story resonated with you, if you or someone you love has ever faced this kind of family drama, financial abuse, or emotional gaslighting, please share your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments below. You are not alone in this fight. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please give this video a like if it moved you, and subscribe for more stories about resilience and finding your strength. Remember, your voice matters. Don't ever let anyone take it away from you.